Smoke rose like whispers from 100 chimneys, as little Thomas stood at the edge of Manchester watching the factories rumble to life before the sun had even kissed the horizon. His eyes followed the line of laborers with soot on their faces and hunger in their eyes. His small hands clutched a lunch wrapped in cloth, given to him by a mother who worked longer hours than sleep allowed, for her face had lost its color, but not its will. Thomas was only 12, but the clanging of hammers and spinning of cotton had become the soundtrack of his youth. Manchester was no longer the quiet market town of old. It had transformed into a beast of steel and smoke, driven by the hunger of industry, and the promise of power machines roared louder. Then voices and factories stood taller than churches on every street. Coal wagons rumbled and children ran between looms and levers. Many, like Thomas, had dreams that had to be locked away, so hands could be freed for labor. His father had died under a collapsed beam at the cotton mill, leaving behind a debt and a legacy. Thomas never understood but was bound to fulfill each morning before the bell rang. He would tie his worn shoes with pieces of string and hurry to the spinning factory where Mr. Cartwright, the supervisor, watched with cold eyes and a colder heart. There was something different about this day, though. As Thomas walked, he noticed the quiet girl from the silk dye house named Eliza, being followed by a man with a strange black coat. He did not belong in the worker crowd, and his eyes darted like rats in the dark. Something about him pulled at Thomas' instincts. At the mill, Thomas worked beside giant spinning jennies, the air thick with cotton dust. His lungs hurt, but he never coughed out loud. Every mistake meant less money and more scolding. When the shift bell rang at noon, he sneaked out to look for Eliza, only to find a group gathered outside the dye house. She had gone missing. They whispered some, said she had run away. Others said she had been taken. But no one dared go to the constables, for in Manchester, justice came late, if at all. Meanwhile, across the Midlands in Birmingham, the skies were no clearer and the air no kinder. But here, it was iron, not cotton, that fed the hungry city. Young Samuel worked at the forge. His arms already marked by burns, he rarely spoke, unless it was to answer his master, the iron master, Mr. Bladen, who prided himself on running the most efficient foundry in the region. Samuel had never seen a day of school. His education came from the glow of molten iron and the sound of anvils. Yet his mind was sharp and full of questions. Every lunch break he would sneak off with a broken bit of chalk and draw on the foundry walls strange machines with wheels and wings, ideas that made no sense to others, but felt real to him. One day, while repairing a gear, he overheard two merchants talking about an order that had come in from Manchester for a special kind of steel, something resistant to fire and pressure. Samuel did not understand the purpose, but the scale of the order was massive. The name on the document said Cartwright, and suddenly he remembered hearing it before. When he got home that night, his mother handed him a crumpled note left by a traveling tinker. It had one line written in shaky letters: "Help me, Manchester, Eliza." Samuel froze. He barely knew the name, but his gut clenched with a feeling that would not go away. He decided he would find out who she was and what tied her to both cities. Back in Manchester, Thomas had begun investigating on his own, hiding behind coal carts and peeking into factories. He discovered the man in the black coat meeting with Mr. Cartwright in the alley behind the mill. He could not hear the words, but saw money exchange hands and a small cloth bag being passed. He knew then Eliza had not run away. The North was no stranger to secrets. Beneath the rising wealth of cotton and steel lay shadows that did not fade with the morning light. As Manchester produced riches and Birmingham forged tools, the story of two children, one vanished, and one determined, began to stir the wheels of a different kind of revolution, one driven not by machines, but by courage. The storm hit Manchester before sunrise. Wind howled through the brick alleys and rain washed the soot off the rooftops. But Thomas was already awake, crouched behind a cart outside the spinning mill, his eyes fixed on Mr. Cartwright's office light glowing unnaturally at this hour. The man in the black coat entered again this time, carrying a wooden box, the kind used to transport silk or sometimes people. Thomas' heart pounded. He had stolen a page from the manager's logbook the night before it was coded, but he recognized the name Eliza scribbled beside a strange sequence of numbers and dates. They aligned with the steel shipment to Birmingham. The pieces began to click together. Miles away, Samuel had made a plan. He pretended to be delivering tools to a Birmingham merchant, but his real aim was to get to Manchester. He rode a coal train hiding beneath sacks, and arrived covered in grime with only the note and the merchant letter in hand. He tracked down a boy named Thomas, whose name Eliza had once mentioned while trading buttons for bread. When they met behind the dye house, their handshake was silent but firm. Samuel showed him the note. Thomas showed him the logbook together. They mapped out a warehouse listed as empty on the edge of the canal. When night fell, they crept in. Inside, they found what no one wanted to see: cages, boxes, and girls locked behind barred doors. Some were unconscious, some were crying, and in the corner, Eliza, pale and bruised but alive. Thomas rushed to her while Samuel picked the lock. Suddenly, footsteps and a lantern beam approached. They hid behind a stack of crates as Mr. Cartwright and the black coat man entered. Arguing about payment and delay, their voices echoed louder than the storm. Samuel held his breath and whispered a plan into Thomas' ear. They had one chance to escape. They created a distraction by setting one of the empty crates ablaze. Smoke filled the warehouse. Shouts erupted. The door swung open. And in the chaos, the boys led the girls. Out, Eliza limped, but refused to stop. They ran through the alleyways to the local chapel where a kind old preacher agreed to hide them. At dawn, the constables arrived, but the preacher had already sent word to a Birmingham journalist known for exposing cruelty. He published a story that shook both cities. Girls trafficked between cotton and steel under the noses of the wealthy. Mr. Cartwright was arrested, so was the man in the coat the mill shut down for inspection. And for the first time in a long while, the workers in Manchester walked out with their heads held high. Samuel returned to Birmingham with Eliza, who later opened a small reading room for girls like her who had once worked with no future in sight. Thomas stayed in Manchester, but now helped organize younger boys to demand fair wages and safe hours. The industrial North would continue to grow with machines and factories, but the spirit of resistance that lived in the hearts of two boys and a girl would never be erased beneath the soot and steel, was a fire that could not be extinguished. Their story spread, whispered between chimney stacks and shouted from rooftops, a tale not of kings or empires, but of ordinary children who stood up and changed the course of two cities forever. That was the true engine behind Manchester and Birmingham, not just the power of industry, but the power of people who refused to remain silent in the face of injustice. Their courage became part of the legacy of the North, written not in ink, but in iron and heart.